No staff allowed in executive meetings. The visitor badge struck the polished walnut table and spun in a slow circle before stopping at Naomi Carter's hand. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the laughter came, light at first, then fuller, richer, the kind of laughter born in rooms where people had not been challenged in years. Naomi bent calmly, picked up the badge, and slid it into the pocket of her charcoal coat. She did not apologize. She did not explain. 47 floors above Manhattan, inside Holloway Global's executive boardroom, the city looked small through the wall of glass. Yellow cabs crawled like toys below. The Hudson reflected a pale winter sun. Inside, the air smelled like leather chairs, expensive coffee, and confidence. 12 executives sat around a table long enough to seat a wedding party. Tailored suits, gold watches, crisp smiles sharpened by habit. At the head of the room, an empty chair waited beneath the company crest. Daniel Pierce leaned back in his seat and adjusted his silver cufflinks. He was the youngest senior vice president in company history, which he mentioned often enough that no one needed reminding. Seriously, he said, glancing around the room for support. Security downstairs is getting worse by the week. More laughter. Naomi stood near the doorway with a worn black portfolio tucked beneath one arm. Her heels were practical, not fashionable. Her coat had seen more winters than the room's marble floor. She looked like someone who had come to deliver papers, fix a copier, or ask for directions. That was all they allowed themselves to see. Linda Brooks from Human Resources lowered her eyes to the agenda in front of her, pretending not to hear. Two analysts whispered behind tablets. Someone at the far end asked if housekeeping had started using the executive elevator now. Naomi let the room spend itself. She studied the faces one by one, not angrily, not nervously, but with the steady attention of someone matching names to memories. Daniel noticed and smirked. "Can we help you?" he asked. "Or are you lost?" Naomi's voice, when it came, was even and clear. No, one word. Nothing more. That seemed to amuse them most of all. Daniel spread his hands. "Then maybe you're early for catering." Another ripple of laughter rolled across the room. Outside, a gust of wind streaked across the river and rattled faintly against the glass. Naomi's gaze drifted to the framed black and white photograph on the side wall. The company's first headquarters, built in 1984, a narrow brick tower with a flag on top, and 6 people smiling in front of it. She knew that photo well. Her mother used to dust its frame after hours. 20 years ago, her mother had walked out of this building carrying a cardboard box and a silence that lasted the rest of her life. No severance. No apology. Just a rumor, a locked badge, and rain on the sidewalk. Naomi looked back at the table. Some of the same names were still here. Some of the same smiles. Daniel tapped the empty chair at the head of the room. "Big day," he said. "New CEO announcement. Try not to touch anything on your way out." Naomi stepped forward. One heel clicked against the stone floor, then the other. She moved past rows of startled eyes and stopped beside the empty chair. Her fingers rested lightly on its back. The room's laughter thinned, uncertain now, like a radio losing signal. Then the doors behind them opened. Chairman Richard Holloway entered without a word, glanced at Naomi, then at the room, and his face hardened. "Before we begin," he said, voice low enough to freeze every breath in the room, "I suggest every person who laughed remembers this moment very carefully." No one sat back down. The room remained suspended in the kind of silence money could not buy and power could not control. Daniel Pierce slowly lowered his hand from his cufflink, as if even that small motion might draw attention. Richard Holloway crossed the carpet with measured steps, set a leather folder on the table, and turned toward Naomi Carter with a nod that belonged to equals, not strangers. "Miss Carter," he said, "thank you for being patient." Several people blinked as if they had misheard him. Daniel gave a thin laugh that died before it reached anyone else. "Richard," he said, forcing ease into his voice, "I think there is some confusion." Richard looked at him the way one looks at a stain on glass. "There was," he replied. "It entered the room before I did." A pulse of discomfort moved around the table. Naomi remained standing beside the empty chair at the head of the boardroom. She did not smile. She did not savor their embarrassment. Her expression was steady, almost distant, as if she had walked through this moment many times before in private and had already spent the emotion it required. Linda Brooks straightened in her seat and closed the notebook she had not read a single line of. Two analysts at the far end lowered their eyes to their screens, suddenly fascinated by spreadsheets that had not changed in the last 10 minutes. Daniel cleared his throat. With respect, the board has not been informed of any appointment. Richard opened the folder and slid copies across the polished table. Then I suggest the board begin reading. Paper whispered through the room. Signatures. Dates. Seals. Emergency Succession Authority. A unanimous vote from controlling shareholders finalized at 6:30 that morning. Naomi Carter, Chief Executive Officer. Effective immediately. Daniel's face lost color in small stages. First the forehead, then the jaw, then the practiced smile. This is absurd, he said quietly. She has no executive history here. Naomi spoke before Richard could answer. I do, she said. Every eye turned toward her. Her voice carried cleanly through the room, calm enough to make the words heavier. I was in this building when half of you were still learning where the elevators were. Daniel scoffed, but it sounded weaker now. Naomi set her worn portfolio on the table and opened it. Inside were ledgers, reports, memos preserved in plastic sleeves, years old but immaculate. Night shift filing room. Summer intern. Contract audit support. Compliance review. She looked at Daniel. I learned this company from the basement up. Richard folded his hands. And while many of you were busy protecting titles, Ms. Carter was building 3 regional logistics firms, restructuring 2 distressed manufacturers, and doubling the value of every operation she touched. Naomi glanced toward the windows where the city glowed cold and distant. You never looked for me, she said. You only looked above you. No one answered. The heating system hummed softly overhead. Somewhere far below, a siren moved through traffic and faded. Daniel tried once more. Even if this is legal, leadership requires trust. Naomi met his eyes for the first time without looking away. Trust is exactly why I am here. She reached into the portfolio again and placed another file on the table, thicker than the first. A red tab marked it with one word, internal. Richard's expression did not change, but Linda Brooks inhaled sharply. Naomi rested her fingertips on the cover. This meeting has 2 agendas, she said. The first was my appointment. She paused just long enough for the room to feel the floor shift beneath it. The second begins with what this company did to my mother 20 years ago. The red tab seemed brighter than everything else in the room. No one reached for the file. No one asked to see it. They had spent careers making decisions with quick hands and louder voices, but now even the smallest movement felt dangerous. Naomi let the silence settle before she opened the cover. Inside were photocopied memos, payroll logs, security badge records, handwritten notes, and an old termination notice with a coffee stain near the bottom corner. My mother's name was Evelyn Carter, Naomi said. Facilities supervisor. 12 years in this building. Perfect attendance for 9 of them. She knew every floor, every lock, every pipe behind every wall. Linda Brooks lowered her eyes. She remembered the name. Others did too, though none volunteered it. Naomi slid the termination paper toward the center of the table. Dismissed for leaking confidential documents to a competitor. Daniel leaned back hard enough that his chair wheels rolled an inch. That was decades ago, he said. And if she violated policy, what relevance does that have now? Naomi looked at him without heat. The kind of relevance truth always has when it arrives late. Richard Holloway said nothing. He simply watched the room with the patience of a man who already knew where this was headed. Naomi lifted another page. It was a maintenance request, stamped urgent and signed by 3 departments on the same date her mother had been accused. At 7:20 that night, my mother was repairing a water line burst on the 22nd floor. At 7:35, security logs show her badge still active there. At 7:41, the supposed leak happened in this boardroom on 47. She placed the logs beside the memo. Elevator records confirm she could not physically be in both places. A quiet rustle moved around the table as papers were finally touched, read, compared. One executive removed his glasses and cleaned lenses that were not dirty. Daniel's jaw tightened. Records can be incomplete. Naomi nodded once. Which is why I brought witnesses. She turned a page and revealed signed statements from retired staff members, a former night guard, 2 maintenance workers, and a receptionist now living in Florida. They were told to stay quiet if they wanted pensions. Linda's breath caught. Daniel looked to Richard. You knew about this? Richard answered carefully. I knew rumors. Ms. Carter brought evidence. Naomi's fingers rested on one final envelope, thinner than the rest. She opened it and removed a memo printed on company letterhead. The signature at the bottom belonged to former Chief Operations Officer Martinvale, dead 5 years now. The message was short. Need someone expendable. Use facilities. Keep board clean before auditors arrive. A low sound escaped someone near the windows. It might have been disbelief. It might have been shame. Naomi's voice remained level. There was accounting fraud tied to vendor contracts. Money routed through shell suppliers. My mother discovered missing inventory tags and asked questions. They needed blame to move faster than the audit. Daniel swallowed. This proves nothing about current leadership. Naomi closed the folder halfway. It proves culture survives longer than people. She looked around the table, letting each face carry its own reflection. Some of you inherited offices built by silence. Some of you rewarded the men who created it. Some of you laughed at me 10 minutes ago because you thought the story would repeat itself. The city beyond. The glass had brightened, sunlight striking towers across the avenue like rows of mirrors. Linda slowly stood. Her chair rolled back with a soft click. I was a junior coordinator then, she said, voice unsteady. I saw Ms. Carter crying in the lobby with a box in her hands. No one interrupted. I did nothing. Naomi met her gaze. Many people did nothing. Daniel tried to speak, but Naomi raised one hand, and he stopped before a word formed. She closed the file completely. That era ends today, she said. And Mr. Pierce, we are not finished discussing what your division hid last quarter. The temperature in the room seemed to drop without the thermostat moving a degree. Daniel Pierce loosened his tie, then tightened it again, the reflex of a man trying to control something when control had already left. Naomi Carter took her seat at the head of the table for the first time, not with ceremony, not with triumph, but with the quiet precision of someone arriving where she had always intended to be. The leather chair barely made a sound. Richard Holloway stepped aside and remained standing near the windows, signaling to everyone present that the room now had one center, and it was no longer him. Naomi pressed a button on the console embedded in the table. Screens along the wall came alive, displaying charts, timelines, and a sharp downward line no one needed explained. Now we discuss the present, she said. Revenue down 11% year-over-year. Vendor losses hidden through delayed reporting. 3 client exits in 60 days. Internal morale at the lowest level since records began. No one reached for coffee. No one checked a phone. Mr. Pierce, Naomi continued, your division oversees 2 of those failed accounts. Daniel forced a smile that looked expensive and fragile. With respect, those losses were market-driven. Naomi touched the screen again. A slide changed. Emails appeared with dates, times, and highlighted lines. Requests ignored. Warnings dismissed. Budget cuts approved despite risk flags. Daniel's smile disappeared so quickly it felt rehearsed. These are internal drafts, he said. They lack context. Naomi nodded once. Then provide context. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The room watched him the way rooms like this rarely do, not with admiration, but with measurement. Linda Brooks slowly folded her hands on the table. Another executive shifted away from Daniel by half an inch, a movement so small it would have gone unnoticed anywhere else. Here, it meant everything. Naomi turned to the far end of the table. Mr. Keating, procurement approved duplicate contracts through shell vendors tied to the same mailing address in Newark. The older man blinked twice. I was unaware. Naomi's gaze did not move. That sentence has been expensive for this company. She pressed another button. A new slide showed employee exit interviews. Anonymous comments filled the screen. No advancement without connections. Concerns ignored. Culture of intimidation. Punished for speaking up. Linda inhaled sharply at the final line. They only hear certain voices. Naomi let the words remain there long enough to sting. This company did not become weak because of competition, she said. It became weak because too many people mistook arrogance for leadership. Outside, clouds moved over the river, turning the glass walls from silver to gray. Inside, even breathing seemed louder. Daniel straightened. So what now? Public humiliation? Purges? Headlines? Naomi looked at him steadily. No. She slid a folder across the table toward him. Accountability. He opened it with stiff fingers. Administrative leave pending forensic review. Access suspended. Company devices to be surrendered by noon. Daniel stared as if the letters might rearrange themselves into mercy. You cannot do this in one morning. Naomi's voice stayed calm. It was done over many mornings. I am only ending it in one. Richard Holloway said quietly. The board supports the action. That landed harder than shouting would have. Daniel looked around for allies and found people suddenly busy with paper, pens, windows, anything but him. Naomi stood. The room instinctively followed, then stopped when she raised one hand. Sit, she said. They obeyed. She walked to the window and looked down at the streets where strangers hurried beneath umbrellas and sunlight, carrying lives untouched by quarterly reports. At 8:05 this morning, she said without turning, 300 employees walked into this building wondering if anyone at this table noticed them. She faced the room again. By 5 o'clock, they will. She returned to her chair, opened a fresh notebook, and clicked her pen. Now, let us begin building something worth inheriting. By 9:15, the news had traveled farther than the elevators. It moved through reception desks, break rooms, loading docks, conference calls, and private chats with the speed of weather. Daniel Pierce had been placed on leave. Procurement was under review. The old executive floor had gone silent, and the woman many people had mistaken for support staff was now running the company. Naomi Carter stepped out of the boardroom carrying only her notebook and the same worn portfolio. No assistants trailed behind her. No photographers waited in the hallway. The corridor lights reflected softly off marble floors that had once felt too polished to touch. Employees standing near the elevator banks straightened when they saw her, then looked away, unsure of the new rules. Naomi offered the first smile of the morning to a male clerk pushing a cart stacked with envelopes. Busy day, she asked. The young man blinked, then laughed nervously. Yes, ma'am. Then let us not slow it down, she said, stepping aside so he could pass first. Inside the elevator, Linda Brooks joined her at the last second, carrying 3 folders against her chest. The doors closed. For a moment, they rode in the hush of cables and rising numbers. You embarrassed no one who did not earn it, Linda said quietly. Naomi kept her eyes on the floor indicator. That was not the goal. Linda nodded. I know. When the doors opened on 23, Naomi did not head toward the executive suites prepared for her. She turned left into operations, where rows of cubicles stretched beneath fluorescent lights, and people worked with the practiced posture of those used to being overlooked. Conversations stopped one desk at a time. A printer hummed. Someone dropped a pen. Naomi walked slowly between stations, reading nameplates, glancing at family photos, noticing coffee mugs chipped at the rim, ergonomic chairs held together with tape, monitors older than some interns. Good morning, she said to no one and everyone. Some answered. Some only stared. She stopped at a desk where a woman in her 50s was sorting invoices with careful hands. Her badge read Teresa Gomez. Naomi recognized the precision immediately. How long have you been here? Naomi asked. 19 years, Teresa replied, bracing as if honesty might cost something. Have they ever asked what needs fixing? Teresa hesitated. No, ma'am. Naomi pulled out a chair and sat beside her. Gasps moved quietly across the floor. I am asking now. Teresa looked around, then lowered her voice. Systems crash every Friday. We work unpaid hours to catch up. We reported it for 2 years. Naomi opened her notebook. Start from the beginning. For the next 30 minutes, employees formed an uncertain line that gradually became a crowd. Broken software. Frozen promotions. Managers who took credit. Departments understaffed for months. Safety concerns and shipping. Exit interviews ignored. Naomi wrote every point by hand. She asked names, dates, costs, and what they would do differently. She listened more than she spoke. On the executive floor above them, people refreshed inboxes and watched rumors multiply. Down here, something rarer was happening. People were being heard. Near noon, facilities manager Carl Benton approached carrying a ring of keys large enough to anchor a boat. Ma'am, he said, embarrassed, there is a leak in conference room B. Been waiting 3 weeks for approval. Naomi stood immediately. Show me. Linda whispered. Your lunch with investors is in 20 minutes. Naomi took off her coat and draped it over a chair. Then they can wait 20 more. She followed Carl down a narrow service corridor that smelled faintly of paint and old metal, the same kind of hallway her mother had walked for years. Pipes rattled overhead. Workers paused when they saw her coming. Naomi did not slow down. At the leaking ceiling tile, a bucket caught steady drops with patient plinks. She looked up, then at Carl. "What do you need?" He named a number so small compared with boardroom budgets, it almost sounded like a joke. Naomi signed immediate approval on the spot. Carl stared at the signature, then at her. That was easy. Naomi picked up the bucket and moved it aside so he could start. "No," she said gently. That was overdue. By 12:40, the building no longer sounded the same. The sharp confidence that usually echoed through executive hallways had softened into cautious footsteps and lower voices. Doors closed gently now. People knocked before entering. Even the elevators seemed quieter as they rose and fell behind brushed steel panels. Naomi Carter finally stepped into the corner office prepared for the chief executive officer, though it still did not feel like hers. The room was larger than some apartments in the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Manhattan in clean lines of glass and winter light. A conference table of pale oak stood untouched. Fresh flowers had been delivered and arranged with expensive precision. A silver tray held sparkling water no one had opened. On the desk, a welcome packet embossed with her initials waited beside 3 pins aligned like soldiers. Naomi set her worn portfolio down on the leather chair instead. She did not sit at the desk immediately. She walked to the windows and looked down. Yellow cabs moved like slow beads through traffic. Steam rose from street grates. Tiny figures crossed intersections carrying coffee cups, lunch bags, umbrellas, ordinary burdens. 20 years ago, her mother had stood somewhere below with a cardboard box in both hands and tears she refused to let fall until she reached the subway. Naomi could almost see it now, not as memory, but as weather returning. She rested her palm lightly against the cool glass. Behind her, the office was silent enough to hear the heating vents breathe. She opened the portfolio and removed a faded photograph. It had been taken with a disposable camera in a small kitchen in Queens. Evelyn Carter stood beside a birthday cake with 7 candles, laughing at something outside the frame. Flour dusted her cheek. Naomi as a child wrapped both arms around her waist. The edges of the picture were bent white with time. Naomi placed it on the desk where the welcome packet had been and moved the packet aside. The gesture was small, but it changed the room. A soft knock came at the door. Linda Brooks stepped in carrying a stack of folders, then stopped when she saw the photograph. "I can come back," she said quietly. "No," Naomi replied. "Come in." Linda placed the folders down. "The investor lunch has been rescheduled." No one complained. Naomi almost smiled. "They will survive." Linda hesitated, then looked toward the windows. "Your mother used to bring cookies every December," she said. "Oatmeal raisin." She left a plate in reception. Naomi turned slowly. "You remember that?" Linda nodded, embarrassed by her own emotion. "I remember taking 2 and pretending I only took 1. For the first time all day, Naomi laughed, brief and warm. It filled the office in a way the flowers could not. Linda's eyes shined. "I should have spoken then." Naomi studied her for a moment. "You are speaking now." Linda swallowed and nodded. "There is one more thing." She handed over a slim envelope found in archived personnel storage that morning. Naomi opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note in neat blue ink on plain paper. "If my daughter ever comes back here, tell her never to bow her head to this building. It only stands because people like us held it up." No signature was needed. Naomi sat at the desk at last. She read the note twice, then set it beside the photograph. Outside, clouds parted and sunlight poured across the river, striking the glass towers opposite in sheets of gold. The office brightened all at once. Naomi closed her eyes for one long breath and let it reach places ambition never had. When she opened them, the city looked different. Not smaller, clearer. She picked up the top folder, uncapped one of the aligned pens, and began reading. On the desk beside quarterly reports and legal briefs, her mother's note moved slightly in the warm current from the vent, as if someone had just walked by. At 3:10 that afternoon, rain began to sweep across the city in thin silver lines, blurring the skyline beyond the glass. Inside Holloway Global, lights came on floor by floor as clouds dimmed the day. Naomi Carter stood in the executive conference room with 6 department heads seated around the table and one empty chair left deliberately open. No catered trays, no polished speeches, just laptops, legal pads, and a screen displaying a single phrase in bold letters. Restore trust in 90 days. The room smelled faintly of coffee and wet wool coats. Linda Brooks sat to Naomi's right. Carl Benton from Facilities sat at the far end in a borrowed blazer that still carried the crease from its packaging. Teresa Gomez from Invoices had a yellow notepad filled edge to edge with handwritten notes. None of them had ever been invited into this room before. Naomi looked at each face before speaking. Titles got us here, she said. Work gets us out. Heads nodded, some slowly, some with visible relief. She assigned cross-department teams, lifted frozen budgets, approved overdue software replacements, and created a direct employee reporting line that bypassed management filters. Every instruction was clear, measured, immediate. People who had spent years being ignored now found themselves answering questions only they could solve. The empty chair remained untouched until the door opened without a knock. Daniel Pierce stepped in carrying a cardboard box and a rain-dark coat over one arm. He had surrendered his badge at noon, but some habits of entrance survived longer than authority. Several people stiffened. Naomi did not. This is a closed meeting, Linda said. Daniel looked only at Naomi. I asked for 5 minutes. Naomi glanced at the wall clock. You have 3. He set the box on the side table. Inside were framed awards, pens, a crystal paperweight, and the artifacts of a career that had looked permanent at breakfast. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Daniel exhaled through his nose. You planned this for years. Naomi answered plainly. I prepared for years. There is a difference. He gave a bitter half-smile. You wanted revenge. If I wanted revenge, Naomi said, you would have learned about this from the press. The room went still. Daniel's shoulders dropped by an inch, the first honest movement anyone had seen from him. Then why let me come up here? He asked. Naomi folded her hands. Because I needed to know whether humiliation taught you anything. He looked around the table at Carl, Teresa, Linda, people he once passed without seeing. The realization landed slowly and all at once. I laughed at you this morning, he said. I laughed at a lot of people. Carl said nothing, but met his eyes steadily. Teresa returned to her notes. Linda waited. Daniel swallowed. I thought leadership meant never being the one overlooked. Naomi's voice softened, though it did not bend. Leadership means noticing who is. The rain intensified, streaking the windows into watercolor lines. Daniel removed a sealed envelope from his coat pocket and placed it on the table. There are names in there. Consultants, vendors, people I protected because they protected me. If you are cleaning house, start there. No one moved. Naomi studied him, then slid the envelope toward Linda. Compliance will review it. Daniel nodded once. I do not expect a favor. Good, Naomi replied. I am offering a lesson. He almost smiled again, but this time it carried shame instead of arrogance. And what lesson is that? Naomi stood and walked to the window beside him. Far below, umbrellas moved like black petals through the streets. A room can cheer for you for years, she said, and still never respect you. Daniel stared at the rain-blurred city, then at his reflection beside hers. For the first time all day, he seemed small enough to become honest. He picked up his box, thanked no one because gratitude had not yet become natural, and turned to leave. At the door he paused. Your mother would be proud. Naomi did not answer until he was gone. She would ask why it took this long. Then she returned to the table, uncapped her pen, and continued the meeting as thunder rolled somewhere beyond the river. By 6:20, the storm had passed, and the city below glistened under fresh evening light. Streets shone like ribbons of copper and glass. Inside Holloway Global, the building was still full, but it no longer carried the nervous energy of the morning. Departments that rarely spoke were now sharing numbers. Managers who once guarded information were answering emails in minutes. On the executive floor, doors that had remained closed for years stood open. Naomi Carter walked through the corridor with her jacket folded over one arm and a stack of handwritten notes in the other. She had not eaten lunch. She had forgotten dinner. Yet her steps were steady, fueled by something stronger than caffeine or adrenaline. Outside conference room C, she found Carl Benton kneeling beside a toolbox, tightening the final bracket under a wall panel. Leak is fixed, he said, standing carefully and wiping his hands on a cloth. And the old air unit on 23 should stop rattling by tomorrow. Naomi looked at the repaired ceiling tile, then at him. How long have you been asking for replacement parts? Carl gave a tired laugh. Since the second Bush administration. Naomi smiled. Submit a full facilities modernization plan by Friday. Carl blinked. You are serious? Completely. He shook his head in disbelief as she walked on. In operations, Teresa Gomez was still at her desk, surrounded by open files and a half-finished sandwich. Naomi stopped beside her. You are still here. Teresa looked up. First day in 19 years anyone asked me what I know. I am not wasting it. Naomi placed a hand over the stack of folders. Go home after this one. Teresa hesitated. Can I ask something? Yes. Why help people who stayed silent? Naomi considered the question longer than expected. Around them, keyboards clicked softly and printers hummed like distant rain. Because silence is often rented, she said. Fear charges high monthly rates. Teresa looked down, eyes wet. Naomi squeezed her shoulder once and moved on. Near the elevators, Linda Brooks stood waiting with the envelope Daniel Pierce had surrendered. Compliance confirmed half the names already, Linda said. You were right. Naomi exhaled slowly. I did not want to be. Linda studied her. Most people in your position would enjoy this day more. Naomi glanced through the glass wall into the fading skyline. Then most people should not be in this position. They rode the elevator to the lobby together. When the doors opened, the security desk officer stood straighter than usual. Two receptionists paused mid-conversation. A janitor polishing brass railings looked up and smiled before returning to work. Naomi crossed the marble floor and stopped near the front entrance where 20 years earlier her mother had walked out carrying a cardboard box. The revolving doors turned steadily, bringing in cool evening air scented faintly of rain and traffic. Naomi could almost hear old footsteps layered beneath the present ones. She set her notes on a side table and looked toward the security desk. Who handles employee hardship requests? She asked. Linda frowned. There is no formal program. Naomi nodded once. There is now. Emergency child care grants, transit support, funeral leave, tuition reimbursement. Draft it tonight. Linda blinked. Tonight. People have been waiting longer than tonight. A voice behind them cleared softly. Naomi turned. Daniel Pierce stood several feet away in street clothes. No badge, no box, no office left to return to. He held a small paper bag with both hands. I found these in storage when I cleaned out my shelves, he said. They belong to your mother. Naomi opened the bag. Inside was a tin of index cards tied with faded string. Maintenance notes written in neat handwriting. Pipe maps. Supply counts. Small reminders. On top, one line in blue ink. Always leave a place better than you found it. Naomi looked up. Daniel's eyes dropped. I am sorry, he said, the words plain and late and real. Naomi closed the bag gently. Then become different. He nodded once and walked into the evening crowd. Naomi watched the doors turn, then handed the tin to Linda. Scan every page, she said. Tomorrow we start with her blueprint. The next morning, sunlight reached the lobby before most executives did. It poured through the glass entrance in long, clean bands, warming the marble floor and turning the brass railings gold. The building opened at 7, but people had begun arriving early, curious to see whether yesterday had been a spectacle or the beginning of something real. Naomi Carter entered through the front doors carrying a paper cup of coffee and her mother's tin box under one arm. No escort, no announcement, just the soft sound of heels on stone and the city waking behind her. The security officer at the desk stood instinctively. Good morning, ma'am. Naomi smiled. Good morning, Marcus. He blinked in surprise that she knew his name. She had asked for the overnight roster before sunrise. Near the elevators, two interns hurried to move aside. Naomi stepped back instead and held the door for them. They thanked her twice. On 23, the old operations floor no longer felt dim. New monitors were being installed. Maintenance crews replaced flickering lights. A whiteboard near the center aisle read ideas we should have heard sooner. It was already half full. Teresa Gomez stood beside it with a marker in hand, speaking to three managers who were taking notes instead of giving orders. Carl Benton rolled past with blueprints tucked under his arm and a grin too wide to hide. We are replacing the East Wing air units, he announced to no one in particular. Applause broke out from 2 rows of cubicles. Naomi laughed softly and kept walking. In the executive suite upstairs, her office door remained open. She had instructed facilities to remove the velvet rope that had once stood outside it during investor visits. On the wall behind her desk now hung only two things: the company charter and a framed photograph of Evelyn Carter in her kitchen, smiling through flour dust and candlelight. Naomi placed the tin box on the desk and opened it. Inside were index cards organized by floor numbers and maintenance routes, every line written in careful blue ink. She chose one at random. Check the places nobody notices. Problems hide there first. Naomi set the card beside her keyboard. Linda Brooks entered carrying a stack of folders, then stopped at the sight of employees already waiting in the hallway. "You have a full schedule," she said. Naomi glanced through the open door. Shipping supervisors, a junior analyst, 2 receptionists, a software engineer, Carl, Teresa, people who had never before expected access to this room. "Good," Naomi replied. "Keep it that way." At noon, Richard Holloway came by quietly with his coat over one arm. He looked around the office, at the open door, the line of employees, the framed photo. "You changed the atmosphere in less than 24 hours, he said. Naomi signed a reimbursement request without looking up. "No, they changed it. I just stopped blocking the air." Richard smiled, older and smaller than he had yesterday. "You know the market will judge quarterly." Naomi finally looked at him. "Then let it." He nodded once and left without another word. By evening, the sun lowered behind the skyline and painted the